December 1942. Near Melun, France, a crippled B-17 flying fortress crash lands in frozen farmland. For 18 months, Luftwaffe pilots had been dying in droves attacking American bomber formations. Everyone knew why. 10 50 caliber machine guns, interlocking defensive fire that could shred a fighter in seconds. The flying fortress was a flying battleship, and getting close meant death. Then German engineers got their hands on Lieutenant Paul Flickinger's intact bomber. At Rechlin test facility, they stripped away the mythology, measured every gun position, timed every turret rotation. What Hauptmann Egon Mayer discovered shattered fighter doctrine forever. Traditional rear attacks, 15 to 20 seconds under devastating crossfire. Side approaches, 4 to 6 guns still tracking you, but from straight ahead. Just one 30 caliber nose gun, 2 seconds of exposure at 600 miles per hour. The most feared bomber in the war had been hiding its greatest weakness in plain sight. The impact shattered the morning silence across the frozen French countryside. Lieutenant Paul Flickinger fought the controls of his B-17F as Wulf Hound skidded belly first through a sugar beet field, her propellers chewing furrows in the hard earth before grinding to a halt in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Behind him, the Rouen-Sotteville rail yard still burned from the morning's raid, black smoke columns marking another successful mission for the 303rd Bomb Group. What Flickinger could not know as he helped his crew evacuate through the radio compartment hatch was that his routine emergency landing had just handed the Luftwaffe its most valuable prize of the war. Within hours, German recovery teams surrounded the downed bomber. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, a mechanical specialist with Luftflotte 3, ran his hands along the intact fuselage with the reverence of an archaeologist discovering treasure. Serial number 41-24585 was clearly visible on the tail. The ball turret hung damaged but repairable. Most critically, the airframe remained structurally sound. For 18 months, the Luftwaffe had been collecting fragments of flying fortresses, twisted aluminum, scattered across European battlefields after successful interceptions. Now they possessed the entire equation. The logistics of moving an intact B-17 60 miles to Leeuwarden airfield demanded precision that only German military efficiency could provide. Specialized transport crews dismantled the wings and tail section, loading components onto heavy trailers normally reserved for moving disabled panzers. The fuselage, stripped of ammunition and fuel, required a custom-built dolly capable of supporting 24,000 pounds. Dutch laborers pressed into service under Wehrmacht supervision watched in amazement as the American bomber moved in convoy through the Netherlands countryside like some mechanical whale beached far from any ocean. At Leeuwarden, Luftwaffe, engineers worked with methodical determination to resurrect Wulf Hound. Chief among them was Hauptmann Heinrich Setz, whose peacetime experience designing civilian aircraft now served a darker purpose. The ball turret required complete replacement of its elevation mechanism, shattered by the impact. Hydraulic lines needed rerouting around damaged sections. The most delicate work involved the electrical systems, miles of wiring that controlled everything from turret rotation to bomb bay doors. Yet within 48 hours, Wulf Hound sat ready for flight, painted in German markings with the tactical code DL+XC prominently displayed on her wings. December 14th dawned crisp and clear across occupied Europe. At 0830 hours, 2 Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighters lifted off from Leeuwarden, taking flanking positions as the reborn B-17 thundered down the runway. German test pilot Major Hermann Gutz, veteran of 100 combat missions, felt the massive bomber respond to his controls with surprising docility. The flight to Rechlin test facility covered 360 miles through airspace thick with Allied reconnaissance flights and German defensive patrols. Any misidentification could prove fatal, making the escort fighters essential insurance against friendly fire incidents. Rechlin represented the scientific heart of German aviation research. Here, captured Allied aircraft surrendered their secrets to teams of engineers and test pilots whose analyses shaped Luftwaffe tactics across every theater. Wulf Hound rolled to a stop before hangars that already housed examples of P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, and various British fighters, but no prize compared to an intact flying fortress, the heavy bomber that American strategists claimed could fight its way to any target without escort protection. The systematic dissection began immediately. German technicians measured firing arcs for each defensive position with surveyor's precision. The tail gunner commanded a cone of destruction extending 2,000 yards directly aft, with limited traverse to either side. Twin waist gunners covered the beam approaches, their 50 caliber Brownings capable of accurate fire out to 3,500 yards. The Sperry ball turret, suspended beneath the fuselage like a mechanical eye, tracked targets through 360 degrees of azimuth with deadly efficiency. Hauptmann Egon Mayer arrived from his base at Beaumont-le-Roger on December 20th, summoned by reports that defied conventional wisdom about bomber vulnerability. At 34, Mayer combined the analytical mind of an engineer with the reflexes of a natural pilot. His growing tally of victories had come at tremendous cost. 12 experienced pilots lost in 3 months attempting traditional beam and quarter attacks against B-17 formations. Each mission resembled a mathematical progression toward squadron extinction. Standing beside Wulf Hound in the cavernous Rechlin hangar, Mayer absorbed details that transformed abstract tactical problems into concrete solutions. The dorsal turret, positioned just aft of the radio compartment, covered the entire upper hemisphere with twin 50 caliber guns. Combined with the ball turret below, these positions created overlapping zones of defensive fire that could track attacking fighters through complete intercept profiles. Traditional German doctrine called for beam attacks at 90-degree angles, exploiting the presumed gap between defensive positions. But precise measurements revealed no gaps, only varying degrees of lethal coverage. The revelation came when Mayer positioned himself directly ahead of the bomber's nose. Here, only a single 30 caliber machine gun on a flexible mount provided defensive fire. The bombardier, responsible for navigation and target identification, could never match the concentrated firepower of dedicated gunner positions. More critically, the physics of high-speed interception created impossible firing solutions for defensive weapons. A fighter attacking head-on at 400 miles per hour, combined with the bomber's forward speed to create closing rates exceeding 600 miles per hour. At such velocities, engagement windows contracted to mere seconds, insufficient time for accurate defensive gunnery. That evening in Rechlin's briefing room, Mayer outlined his conclusions to assembled Luftwaffe pilots and technical staff. Traditional attacks exposed fighters to multiple gun positions for 15 to 20 seconds of sustained fire. Frontal approaches reduced exposure time to 2 seconds maximum while facing minimal defensive armament. The mathematics were unforgiving but clear. Revolutionary tactics demanded revolutionary courage, but the alternative was extinction through conventional wisdom. The captured flying fortress had become more than intelligence prize. It was a classroom where German pilots would learn to exploit the one weakness American designers never anticipated. Through the harsh winter months of 1943, Wulf Hound transformed from war prize into the most valuable textbook in German aviation history. Teams of Luftwaffe pilots, engineers, and ordnance specialists descended upon Rechlin like students cramming for a final examination where failure meant death at 30,000 feet. Each rivet, each gun mounting, each armor plate underwent scrutiny that would have impressed the Boeing engineers who originally designed the aircraft in distant Seattle factories. Oberleutnant Georg Peter Ader, Meyer's most trusted wingman, spent entire afternoons crawling through the bomber's interior passages. His precise hands traced ammunition feed systems that supplied 11,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition to 10 defensive positions. The complexity astounded him. Each gun turret required independent hydraulic power, electrical controls, and mechanical linkages that functioned flawlessly even when battle damage severed primary systems. American industrial capacity had created redundancy upon redundancy, ensuring that disabled systems could be bypassed without compromising defensive capability. The Sperry ball turret represented engineering artistry that German designers grudgingly admired. Suspended beneath the fuselage like a glass sphere, it rotated through 360 degrees of traverse while its twin 50 caliber Brownings elevated from directly below to nearly horizontal. The gunner, cramped inside the transparent dome, commanded an unobstructed view of the lower hemisphere. Traverse motors could swing the turret 50 degrees per second, fast enough to track fighters attempting high-speed beam attacks. More ominously, the turret's position eliminated blind spots that earlier bomber designs had suffered beneath the fuselage. Technical measurements revealed the mathematical precision of American defensive planning. Effective range for the 50 caliber Brownings extended to 3,500 feet under ideal conditions, though accurate fire typically occurred within 2,000 yards. The dorsal turret, positioned behind the cockpit, covered everything above the horizontal plane with overlapping fields of fire that intersected those of the tail gunner. Twin waist positions guarded the beam approaches, their guns capable of swiveling through 90 degrees of traverse to track targets from directly abreast to well aft of the bomber. Ammunition analysis provided equally sobering intelligence. Each gun position carried between 400 and 500 rounds of mixed ammunition, armor-piercing incendiary, ball and tracer rounds loaded in patterns designed to maximize damage against single-engine fighters. The sheer volume of defensive firepower meant that B-17 formations could sustain continuous fire for several minutes without exhausting their magazines. German fighters, by contrast, carried ammunition for perhaps 30 seconds of sustained firing. By early February, Mayer had compiled detailed charts showing firing arcs, ammunition loads, and traverse rates for every defensive position. The data painted a grim picture for conventional attack profiles. Beam attacks at 90 degrees exposed fighters to fire from waist guns, ball turret, and dorsal turrets simultaneously. Rear quarter approaches faced the concentrated fire of tail guns supplemented by waist positions. Traditional fighter doctrine had evolved to exploit gaps between defensive weapons, but Wulf Hound demonstrated that American designers had eliminated such vulnerabilities through systematic overlapping coverage. The breakthrough came during flight testing that began on March 17th. German test pilots took turns flying the captured bomber while others attacked in camera-equipped Focke-Wulf 190s, recording engagement profiles from every conceivable angle. The film evidence developed in Rechlin's photographic laboratories provided irrefutable proof of what ground measurements had suggested. Rear attacks triggered devastating crossfire from multiple turret positions, creating kill zones that no single-engine fighter could survive. Major Hans Philipp, commanding officer of JG-1, witnessed one test flight that crystallized the tactical revolution brewing at Rechlin. His experienced pilots, veterans of campaigns from the Battle of Britain through the Eastern Front, approached Wulf Hound using proven techniques that had worked against earlier bomber types. Gun camera footage showed concentrated fire from tail, waist, and ball turret positions converging on attacking fighters with deadly accuracy. Simulated engagement times stretched beyond 20 seconds, an eternity when facing multiple 50 caliber machine guns. Frontal attacks produced dramatically different results. The single 30 caliber nose gun, operated by the bombardier while simultaneously managing navigation duties, could not match the sustained fire of dedicated gunner positions. More critically, the physics of head-on interception compressed engagement windows to impossibly brief intervals. Fighters diving from altitude at 400 miles per hour, combined with bomber forward speed, to create closing rates exceeding 600 miles per hour. At such velocities, defensive gunners faced tracking problems that overwhelmed human reflexes and mechanical traverse systems. Mayer spent long evenings in Rechlin's operations room, converting film analysis into tactical doctrine that might save German fighter squadrons from extinction. His calculations were precise and unforgiving. Traditional beam attacks exposed fighters to defensive fire for 15 to 20 seconds while covering approximately 2 miles of flight path. Frontal approaches reduced exposure time to 2 seconds maximum while facing minimal opposition from a single light machine gun. The revolutionary doctrine emerged from these mathematical realities. Attacking fighters would approach in Ketten formations of 3 aircraft, diving from altitude toward bomber formations at maximum speed. The attack profile called for engagement at 12 o'clock high, diving at 15 degrees below horizontal to maximize closure rate while minimizing exposure time. Pilots would open fire at 800 yards, concentrate on cockpit and engine areas, then break away sharply at 100 yards to avoid collision. Training protocols developed around split-second timing that left no margin for error. Miss the narrow firing window and the opportunity vanished. Hesitate during the breakaway maneuver and collision became inevitable. The tactics demanded ice-cold precision from pilots accustomed to extended dogfighting engagements where superior skill could overcome tactical disadvantages. By late March, Wulf Hound had served as professor for dozens of German pilots who would carry its lessons back to operational squadrons across occupied Europe. The captured bomber had revealed not just technical specifications, but tactical vulnerabilities that American strategic doctrine never anticipated. Soon, those lessons would be tested in the lethal skies over Fortress Europe, where theoretical knowledge would transform into survival or death at 30,000 feet. The theory had been haunting Egon Mayer since October, emerging from careful observation of American bomber formations and the mounting casualty reports that arrived at Beaumont-le-Roger with depressing regularity. Traditional fighter doctrine, perfected against lightly armed British bombers, was proving suicidal against the flying fortresses that appeared in growing numbers over occupied France. Mayer's squadron had lost 4 experienced pilots in 2 weeks attempting beam attacks that exposed them to concentrated defensive fire for fatal seconds. Something fundamental had to change, and November 23, 1942, would provide the first laboratory test of revolutionary thinking. The morning intelligence briefing at JG-2's Operations Center painted a familiar picture. 20 of 4 B-17s from the 91st Bomb Group were approaching the heavily defended submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, flying in the precise combat box formations that American strategists believed made their bombers invulnerable to single-engine fighters. At 25,000 feet, the flying fortresses droned eastward through crystalline air, their contrails etching white lines across the November sky like chalk marks on a deadly blackboard. Mayer studied the formation diagrams with the intensity of a chess master analyzing an opponent's opening moves. The combat box placed bombers in staggered echelons designed to maximize overlapping defensive fire while maintaining tight formation discipline. Light aircraft flew slightly ahead and above with high and low squadrons positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that could devastate attacking fighters. German pilots had been dying in those killing zones for months. Their Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s reduced to burning fragments by concentrated 50 caliber fire. At 11:30 hours, Mayer led his Kett formation off the grass runway at Beaumont-le-Roger. 3 Focke-Wulf 190A4s climbed rapidly through the thin air, their BMW 801D radial engines providing 2,100 horsepower each. The aircraft represented the finest single-engine fighters in German service, fast, heavily armed, and ruggedly constructed to survive battle damage that would destroy lesser machines. Each carried 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns, firepower sufficient to destroy any bomber if properly applied. Climbing through 28,000 feet, Mayer spotted the American formation 15 miles distant. The B-17s maintained perfect discipline, their olive-drab camouflage standing out against the pale sky like a school of mechanical fish swimming through an alien. Medium. Defensive gunners would be scanning the horizon for attacking fighters, their 50 caliber Brownings loaded and ready to fill the air with streams of armor-piercing incendiary rounds. Traditional doctrine called for beam attacks at 90 degrees to the bomber stream, exploiting the presumed gap between defensive gun positions. Mayer had watched too many good pilots die attempting such approaches. Today would test a different theory, one born from careful observation of gun turret positions and the mathematics of high-speed interception. Instead of attacking from the side where multiple gun positions could engage simultaneously, he would approach from directly ahead. The dive began at 11:55 hours, 3 Focke-Wulfs rolling into a steep descent that built airspeed rapidly toward the 400-mile-per-hour mark. Mayer selected the lead B-17 in the high squadron, its nose art partially visible through his armored windscreen. The bomber's single-nose gun represented minimal defensive firepower compared to the concentrated fire from beam positions. More critically, the physics of frontal attack compressed engagement time to seconds rather than the prolonged exposure of traditional approaches. At 800 yards, Mayer opened fire. His cannons and machine guns converged on the cockpit area with surgical precision. Each round aimed 2 aircraft lengths ahead to account for deflection at 600 miles per hour combined closing speed. The Bombardier's 30 caliber nose gun returned fire sporadically, its tracers falling behind the rapidly closing German fighters. Defensive gunners in other positions struggled to traverse their weapons fast enough to track targets approaching at impossible angles. The results exceeded Mayer's most optimistic projections. His 20mm shells shattered the starboard wing root of the lead B-17, severing fuel lines and primary structural members in a cascade of aluminum fragments and burning gasoline. The wing folded upward at an impossible angle before separating completely, sending the 25-ton bomber into a flat spin that no amount of pilot skill could recover. 10 men died in those spinning seconds, victims of tactical innovation they never saw coming. Oberleutnant Heinrich Kraft, flying Mayer's right wing, scored hits on a second fortress before breaking away to avoid collision. His shells punctured the bomber's No. 3 engine, which began trailing smoke and oil. The aircraft maintained formation briefly before falling behind, its crew struggling with damaged controls and failing systems. It would crash land in occupied territory 20 minutes later, adding another victory to the morning's unprecedented success. Feldwebel Johann Pichler, the third member of Mayer's Kett, concentrated his fire on the cockpit of a low-squadron B-17. His shells spider-webbed the armored glass and wounded the co-pilot, though the bomber remained airworthy. The psychological impact proved as significant as physical damage. American crews had never experienced frontal attacks executed with such precision and coordination. The entire engagement lasted 4 minutes from initial contact to final breakaway. German losses totaled 0 aircraft, 0 pilots. American losses included 2 B-17s destroyed and 1 severely damaged, a kill ratio that reversed months of mounting German casualties. More importantly, post-mission intelligence reports from captured air crews revealed complete surprise at the attack profile. American gunnery training had focused exclusively on beam and quarter attacks, leaving defensive doctrine unprepared for high-speed frontal approaches. Within hours, 8th Air Force intelligence officers were revising their tactical assessments. The official report noted laconically, Change of enemy fighter tactics observed. Nearly all attacks frontal, apparently aimed at cockpit area. What the report could not capture was the paradigm shift occurring within German fighter commands. Mayer's experimental attack had proven that mathematical analysis could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The Saint-Nazaire mission became the proof of concept for revolutionary tactics that would spread throughout the Luftwaffe. Soon, every German fighter pilot would learn to approach American bombers from directly ahead, exploiting the one weakness that Boeing engineers had never anticipated. The age of frontal attacks had begun with 3 Focke-Wulfs and 30 seconds of precisely applied firepower. The captured flying fortress became a traveling professor of lethality, transported by rail and truck convoy to fighter bases across Hitler's European empire. At Abbeville-Drucot, pilots from JG-26 crawled through Wulf Hound's cramped interior passages, measuring sight lines and armor thickness with the methodical precision of medical examiners. Major Johannes Seifert, the unit's commanding officer, watched his experienced pilots emerge from the bomber with expressions mixing revelation and grim determination. These men had been dying at unsustainable rates attempting conventional attacks. Now they possessed blueprint knowledge of their enemy's singular vulnerability. The pilgrimage continued through the spring of 1943. At Vitry-en-Artois, JG-2's sister squadron absorbed lessons that would transform their tactical doctrine. Hauptmann Kurt Bühligen, an ace with 43 victories, spent an entire afternoon examining the nose gun position that represented the flying fortress's Achilles heel. The single 30 caliber machine gun mounted on a flexible bracket could traverse perhaps 60 degrees laterally, but its rate of fire and stopping power paled compared to the concentrated firepower protecting the bomber's flanks and rear approaches. Technical refinements emerged from systematic analysis of engagement parameters. Attack formations crystallized around the Kett structure, 3 aircraft in tight, line abreast formation approaching from 12 o'clock high. The geometry provided optimal firepower distribution while maintaining formation cohesion during the critical firing pass. Individual aircraft spacing of 100 meters prevented collision during the violent breakaway maneuvers that followed engagement. Ammunition selection became a science unto itself. High explosive shells proved most effective against the bomber's aluminum construction, their blast effects causing structural failures that armor-piercing rounds could not achieve. Mixed loading patterns combined explosive shells with incendiary rounds designed to ignite fuel tanks and hydraulic systems. Each Focke-Wulf 190 carried approximately 400 rounds of 20mm ammunition, sufficient for perhaps 12 seconds of sustained fire when properly rationed across multiple engagements. Altitude tactics required mathematical precision that left no margin for error. German fighters would climb to 30,000 feet or higher, positioning themselves 3,000 feet above approaching bomber formations. The dive profile called for 15-degree descent angles that maximized closure rate while providing stable gun platforms. Steeper dives generated excessive airspeed that compressed firing windows beyond human reaction times. Shallower approaches reduced impact velocity but extended exposure to defensive fire. At Cazaux Gunnery Range in southwestern France, German pilots practiced against camera-equipped T-target drones that simulated B-17 approach profiles. The training revealed brutal truths about split-second marksmanship at closing speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour. Pilots learned to open fire at 800 yards, maximum effective range for their cannons, and concentrate on cockpit areas where crew casualties would disable the entire aircraft. Missing by mere inches meant collision death for both attacker and target. The breakaway maneuver demanded reflexes honed through hundreds of practice runs. At 100 yards separation, attacking pilots executed violent pull-ups or wing-overs to avoid the bomber's propeller wash and structural debris. The forces involved could exceed 4 gravities, compressing pilots into their seats while blood drained from their brains. Blackout during breakaway meant certain collision, making physical conditioning as critical as gunnery skills. By midsummer, entire Luftwaffe fighter wings had converted to frontal attack doctrine. JG-27, operating from Sicily against Allied bombers targeting Italian industrial centers, reported dramatic improvements in kill ratios after adopting Mayer's tactics. Major Joachim Helbig's pilots destroyed 9 B-24 Liberators in a single engagement over Naples, losing only 2 Messerschmitt 109s in return. The mathematics of aerial warfare were shifting in Germany's favor for the first time since American heavy bombers began appearing over Europe. Mayer himself had become the doctrine's most lethal practitioner. His victory tally climbed steadily through the summer months as 8th Air Force raids intensified. Each engagement provided laboratory data for tactical refinement. The September 15th mission over Stuttgart became a masterpiece of applied theory. 3 B-17s destroyed in 19 minutes of precise frontal attacks. His guns shattered cockpit areas with surgical accuracy, killing crews before defensive gunners could respond effectively. The human cost of innovation revealed itself in mounting casualty reports from fighter squadrons attempting to master the new tactics. Frontal attacks demanded ice-cold nerves and reflexes that not every pilot possessed. The original group of pilots trained in the doctrine suffered 40% casualties within 6 months, men killed by millisecond timing errors or mechanical failures during critical moments. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, one of the first pilots to practice against Wulf Hound at Rechlin, died when his Focke-Wulf's engine failed during a breakaway maneuver over Schweinfurt. His aircraft clipped the tail of a B-17, sending both machines earthward in a tangle of metal and flame. Yet the statistics supported continued development of frontal attack methods. Traditional beam approaches had yielded kill ratios of 1 bomber destroyed per 12 to 15 German fighter losses, mathematics that guaranteed squadron extinction within months. Frontal attacks improved those odds to 1 bomber per 5 to 7 fighter casualties. Still brutal, but sustainable given German production capabilities and pilot training programs. By early autumn, American intelligence officers were documenting the tactical shift in their after-action reports. 8th Air Force planners noted that 43% of bomber losses now resulted from frontal attacks compared to 12% earlier in the war. The response would be predictable: additional nose armament in the form of chin turrets mounted on B-17G models rolling off Boeing production lines. But the damage had been done. German pilots possessed battlefield knowledge that would continue claiming American lives until the war's end. Mayer's personal score reached 90 victories by November, with 26 4-engine bombers among his confirmed kills. Each represented mathematical vindication of tactical innovation born from studying a single captured aircraft. Wulf Hound had taught the Luftwaffe how to kill flying fortresses, and that deadly education was spreading across every fighter base in occupied Europe. March 2nd, 1944 dawned gray and bitter over the Ardennes, the kind of morning that made veteran pilots check their instruments twice and pray their engines would not fail over enemy territory. Hauptmann Egon Mayer led 14 Focke-Wulf 190s northeast from Beaumont-le-Roger toward radar contacts indicating a substantial American formation approaching the rail yards at Sedan. His aircraft, factory number 470468, bore the scars of 18 months of frontal attacks, patches of replacement aluminum where flak fragments had penetrated, stress cracks around gun ports from repeated high G maneuvers, and a faded victory tally that had reached 102 confirmed kills. The bomber formation materialized through broken clouds at 26,000 feet. 18 B-17Gs from the 381st Bomb Group, their new chin turrets glinting like additional eyes scanning for attacking fighters. Mayer studied the defensive box through his armored windscreen, calculating approach angles with the methodical precision that had made him Germany's premier expert in frontal attack doctrine. These newer fortresses carried twin 50 caliber machine guns in powered chin turrets, a direct response to the tactical revolution he had pioneered. American industrial might was adapting to German innovation, but the basic mathematics of head on interception remained unchanged. What Mayer could not see, flying 5,000 feet below the bomber stream, were 29 P-47 Thunderbolts from the 56th Fighter Group, maintaining perfect radio discipline at 31,000 feet. Major Francis Gabreski, leading the escort formation, had positioned his fighters to exploit the fundamental weakness of frontal attacks, the vulnerable climb-out phase when German fighters, having expended their ammunition and energy, struggled to regain altitude while their engines labored at maximum power settings. At 11:42 hours, Mayer rolled into his attack dive. The familiar sensation of building G-forces pressed him into his seat as airspeed climbed past 400 miles per hour. His wingmen, Oberleutnant Werner Hohenberg and Feldwebel Paul Schauder, maintained perfect formation discipline despite the lethal mathematics they faced. Each pilot carried enough ammunition for perhaps 8 seconds of sustained fire, precious seconds that had to be perfectly timed against targets approaching at combined closure rates exceeding 600 miles per hour. The engagement unfolded exactly as doctrine prescribed. Mayer opened fire at 800 yards, his 420mm cannons converging on the lead B-17's cockpit area. High explosive shells shattered armored glass and punctured aluminum skin with surgical precision. The bomber's new chin turret returned fire desperately, its twin guns traversing to track the impossible fast German fighters. But physics favored the attackers. Defensive gunners could not match the reflexes required for accurate fire against targets approaching at such velocity. Mayer's shells found their mark. The lead fortress lurched violently as explosive rounds severed control cables and hydraulic lines. Its number 2 engine began streaming coolant, white vapor trails mixing with darker smoke from burning electrical systems. The aircraft fell away from formation, mortally wounded, but still airborne, as its pilot fought damaged. Controls in a desperate attempt to reach friendly territory. The breakaway maneuver began at 100 yards separation, Mayer pulling his Focke-Wulf into a climbing left turn that subjected his aircraft to over 4 Gs of acceleration. Engine temperature gauges climbed dangerously as the BMW 801D radial worked at maximum power settings to convert airspeed into altitude. This moment of maximum vulnerability, when German fighters climbed slowly away from their targets, represented the critical flaw in frontal attack doctrine that American escort pilots had learned to exploit. Gabreski's Thunderbolts dove from their perch 5,000 feet above, their Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines howling at emergency power settings. 29 fighters plummeted earthward like mechanical hawks, their combined firepower representing over 250 machine guns aimed at 14 climbing German aircraft caught in the worst possible tactical position. Mayer's radio crackled with warnings from his pilots, but escape required altitude and airspeed that his formation simply did not possess. The slaughter lasted 3 minutes. American 50 caliber fire raked the climbing German fighters with devastating accuracy, turning innovative tactics into death traps through superior positioning and numerical advantage. Mayer's Focke-Wulf absorbed hits in the engine compartment, wings, and cockpit area as multiple Thunderbolts converged on the formation leader. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across his windscreen while engine oil pressure dropped toward zero. His aircraft, the platform that had pioneered revolutionary combat doctrine, became a falling coffin over the forests of northeastern France. The crash site near Montmédy yielded little beyond twisted aluminum and a confirmation that tactical innovation, however brilliant, could not overcome strategic disadvantage. At 26 years old, Mayer had become both architect and victim of the doctrine that bore his name. His students would carry on the frontal attack methods, but American escort fighters now made daylight interception increasingly suicidal for Luftwaffe pilots regardless of their tactical sophistication. Wulf Hound had preceded its inadvertent teacher into operational obscurity. In September 1943, the captured B-17 transferred to Kampfgeschwader 200, the Luftwaffe's special operations unit responsible for clandestine missions behind enemy lines. Repainted with the tactical code A3PAE, the former American bomber began a new career dropping agents into occupied territories and conducting electronic intelligence gathering flights that exploited its familiar silhouette to avoid Allied fighter interception. For 18 months, the aircraft that had revolutionized German fighter tactics served a different master. Its bomb bay carried German agents rather than high explosives, while specialized radio equipment replaced defensive gun positions. The irony was perfect. An American bomber, captured through routine combat damage, was now penetrating Allied airspace to gather intelligence that might prolong German resistance. The end came on April 10, 1945, when American B-24 Liberators attacked Oranienburg airfield north of Berlin. Wulf Hound, parked among a collection of experimental aircraft and captured Allied machines, disappeared in the coordinated bombing that reduced the facility to smoking ruins. The bomber that had taught the Luftwaffe to kill flying fortresses died under American bombs, its contribution to aerial warfare reduced to twisted metal and classified intelligence reports. Yet the legacy endured in ways that transcended individual aircraft or pilots. Post-war interviews with surviving German fighter pilots consistently emphasized the tactical revolution born from systematic study of captured American technology. Frontal attacks had become the only viable method for intercepting heavily defended bomber formations, even as American industrial capacity produced escorts that made such missions increasingly futile. The mathematics validated Mayer's innovation. USAF statistical analysis showed that 43% of bomber losses in 1943 and 44 resulted from frontal attacks, a dramatic increase from the 12% recorded in early 1942. American response included not only chin turrets, but revised escort tactics and improved fighter aircraft, yet the fundamental vulnerability had been exposed and exploited. The true measure of Wulf Hound's impact lay in the ledger of warfare itself. The aircraft flew 95 missions for the Luftwaffe before its destruction, but the tactics developed from its study accounted for over 2,000 Allied bomber casualties. The price of that knowledge was paid by hundreds of German fighter pilots who flew headlong into American formations at 600 miles per hour, betting everything on 2 seconds of firing time in a war where mathematical precision had become the difference between survival and extinction.